I'm Mary Woolley, the president of Research America, and on behalf of our board, many of whom are here today, and if you'd either wave or stand up, I want to acknowledge you, board members of Research America. We thank you for joining us, and we all, the board and I, thank the fabulous colleagues of mine on staff for doing all the work and making this happen. Thank you all. Now today, 9/11, is not, of course, just any day in American history. Even as Americans hold remembrances all across the country for those who perished in the 9/11 attacks 13 years ago, on this anniversary in particular, we are faced with so many imponderables. It's difficult to get our bearings as a nation. The President last evening emphasized in his address to the nation that the threat of terrorism is top of mind, a major concern for many and all Americans today, something we ignore at our peril. He was clear that we must and we will act. He further noted that we are acting to contain and cure, eventually, Ebola. American public health know-how is already at work and will be stepped up. And our scientists in both the private and public sectors are teamed up to develop effective treatments and vaccines ASAP. This is how it should be. Now, you may have noticed that the President used cancer as an analogy to describe the scourge of ISIL. Yet we're going to act against ISIL with only imperfect knowledge about it, even as we work assiduously to learn more. It seems to me that it's like trying to end cancer. There's a lot we don't know yet that we have to understand, but we also have to act. And that's true of other diseases that plague us. Consider Alzheimer's. An estimated 5 million people aged 65 and over right now are living with Alzheimer's. This number is expected to almost triple to 16 million by 2050. And then there's obesity rates remaining stubbornly high, contributing to diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and other illnesses. Are we doing enough? Will the year ahead be a time of more action? Now, add the facts on the ground about what else is ailing us. Unresolved immigration challenges and woefully inadequate funding both impact our ability to attract and retain the best and brightest young people to advance science and innovation. The reality is that instead of nurturing it, we've put medical research and development on a kind of cruise control in many respects, with the predictable result of an escalation in the pace here while other nations lure U.S. industry with more favorable tax and regulatory climates. This afternoon, we're going to take a look at where all of this and more leaves us in terms of maintaining our nation's preeminence in science and innovation, where it leaves us in terms of saving lives and improving the quality of life, and where it leaves us in terms of continuing to drive our economy. And speaking of drivers, keeping a finger on the pulse of public opinion, as many of you know, is a major driver in forming our advocacy at Research America. New poll data from just a couple of weeks ago, the end of August, shows us that only about a third of the American public now say that the U.S. will be the global leader in science and technology by the year 2020. That's not that long from now. Almost as many say that that world leadership will be held by China, and the rest chose the UK or another nation. Another grim finding was that only 39% say the US will be the world's healthcare leader in 2020. And in case you're wondering, this forecast is not okay with the American public. We're all in a hurry for better health, better treatments and preventions and cures. And we want those breakthroughs and those new products here now. And we want new industries like the biotech industry and its successor industries that we don't even know the names of yet, to be born here in America, to employ and be led by our children and grandchildren. We all agree that the ultimate goal is a healthier, more productive society. The American Heart Association's new brand, I think, effectively articulates the whole point with their, quote, "Life is why," unquote, initiative. Achieving longer, healthier lives to cherish moments with family, friends, and loved ones. Isn't that why we all do what we do, day in and day out? Isn't that why those who treat patients do their jobs? Why those who protect the public's health and who work to assure access to patients on an evidence-based platform do their work? Life is why. Isn't it why those who conduct research and develop new products for better health work long hours every day? It's why advocates continue to pound the corridors of Capitol Hill, continue to activate our grassroots networks, talk to the media, and urge decision makers to support research funding and policies that support medical innovation. Yeah, life is why. Thank you, American Heart Association. Now, a word about those policymakers. With the midterm elections drawing near, now is the must-do time to use our voter education initiative, Ask Your Candidates, to contact congressional candidates to ask them if and how they will support medical progress if elected. We have laptops set up right outside the room today to help you. Send a message to candidates in your state and district. Please stop by and do that, and then spread the word. There's other ways you can help that important campaign. Now I'd like to take a moment to thank our National Forum sponsors. Thank you panel sponsors, Celgene, Johnson & Johnson, and Onyx Pharmaceuticals. And thanks to our lunch, topic, and science sponsors, Teva, the University of Maryland School of Medicine, Genentech, and HudsonAlpha Institute for Biotechnology. And thanks to our supporting sponsors, Astellas, Gilead, Novartis Oncology, the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, Bristol-Myers Squibb Company, and Northeast Ohio Medical University. And thanks to our media sponsors, CQ Roll Call, The Hill, and WebMD. We're very pleased to announce that WebMD is live streaming today's programs to viewers across the country. You can all join the conversation in social media using the hashtag RAForum14. And keep in mind that there will be a brief Q&A session at the end of each panel, and we do encourage you to frame your questions and participate. So I'd like to introduce the first panel now. I see you all around the room. Please come forward. The moderator of our first panel is Corby Kummer. Corby is the senior editor at The Atlantic magazine, where he edits articles on politics and public affairs, and he also writes a regular food column. He's a contributor to Vanity Fair, the New York Times, and the Smithsonian. Now, you can read a more complete bio on Corby and all our panelists in your program. If you want to go up on the stage, please do. France Córdova will be with us. France is the director of the National Science Foundation, recently assuming her post. Anthony Fauci. Tony's the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Bill Hait, the global head of Janssen Research and Development, the pharmaceutical companies of Johnson & Johnson. Dr. Hait is a member of the board of Research America. Richard Myers, the director and president of the HudsonAlpha Institute. And John Seffrin, the CEO of the American Cancer Society. And Dr. Seffrin is also a Research America board member. Over to you, Corby. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So the mandate I was given today was to talk about who's going to fund medical research in the future, especially who's going to give money to blind alleys, to the kind of trial and error that leads to actual new knowledge and discovery. And I was being quoted, and someone here will say exactly who said this. Remember, it's called research. You have to do things over and over again. They're often wrong. They often go no place before you actually find the new knowledge. And I was asked to point out Research America polling with the Battelle group, a projection of R&D funding forecast for the next 10 years. So before the next 10 years, in 2023, China is projected to overtake the United States in research and development funding. The figure is going to be this scary figure in 2023, that China would be putting in $602 billion compared to our $593. But right now, we're all very aware of how fast China is moving. So before we get into a bit on China, why don't we go down the panel and say, how much have you seen the shift in basic research funding? And as opposed to, and who's actually funding innovation and the kind of blue sky research, blind alley research that we most need to make new discoveries?
Right. You want me to start? I'm Córdova, Director of the National Science Foundation. And
Very good place to start with that question.
yes, and of course our mandate, our mission is to further the progress of science by funding basic or fundamental research. And so the bulk of our portfolio funding really goes to fundamental research, and that lies, as you all know, appreciate, at the basis of the discoveries that are made. They all start with basic research. And then that proceeds into innovation and tools. And, you know, I always notice when I go to a hospital that all the very fine equipment that they have that images and then is used for diagnoses and finally cures or palliatives for our ailments, all started with basic research. Well, a lot of times with physics or chemistry, materials research, and so on. And so I like to think that we are going to be great, continue to be great contributors towards what you asked for in the beginning, who funds the
We'd all like to think you're going to be great contributors, and we know that you should be great contributors, but who's actually going to give you the money? Because what we hear is that it's ever more restricted, and with a sequester, you're in dire straits.
Well, I think I'll let my colleagues talk, and we'll come back to that, but clearly that's where Research America has made such an impact, is to keep reminding all of us and the public that they need to get the message about who makes the discoveries, which are namely the folks that we all fund, and how that money comes to them. NSF gives 94% of the money it gets, which is just over $7 billion, right back to researchers, mainly in our universities, but also research institutes and even businesses. And we couldn't do that without Congress authorizing and appropriating those funds. And so it's a virtuous cycle where we need to remind everybody where the money comes from, and then get the messages about why these discoveries, how they're made, and why it's so important to continue in this vein and be, as Mary said in her really wonderful remarks, is to keep being great advocates for science and engineering to Congress, who is a benefactor to all the American public.
Thank you. Dr. Hait, we had the opportunity to have lots of frank and useful exchange before the panel. And if you'd like to talk about your own trajectory, it would be really interesting, from research to academic medicine
I love the quote about research, and Einstein had another one. He said something like, if we knew what we were doing, we wouldn't call it research. And I think that's really important. My own perspective, having come from academics and then joined industry, really has to do with an unintended consequence of an extraordinary development, and that was the era of molecular biology, where we understood and sequenced the human genome. We had these incredible tools to express proteins, crystallize proteins, make incredible drugs. And based on that knowledge, there was a push to translate that knowledge into practical use. And I think what happened, that pendulum swung so far over at the NIH that many, many grants are judged by the applicability or the translational aspects, which really moves things away from the area where we really need to get back to, I believe, and that's uncovering fundamental knowledge. And my perspective from the pharmaceutical industry is our rate-limiting step is not making a highly potent drug. Our rate-limiting step is a limitation on knowledge. And pharmaceutical industries are great at discovering drugs. People in academics and other types of institute, they're great at uncovering new knowledge, and I think we have to get back there.
You know, when you say the metric, the importance is applicability, and where will the practical outcome be? And you have to demonstrate that to get a grant. Isn't that too bad? Well, you're in industry where everything is about making basic research useful to the public. But isn't it true also that foundations have moved away from thinking of funding basic research, and they're all metric driven famously? So where's the difference?
I hope not. I mean, I think you're right. I see it in the area that I know best, in cancer research, where there's such a push because there's such a devastating disease that it's a natural tendency. But at the same time, we have to remind ourselves that our shortcomings in an application, especially in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry, is not because we can't make very potent drugs. It's we don't have the knowledge to what are the best targets for somebody's disease, whether it's cancer, Alzheimer's, mood, diabetes, things that we just need more fundamental knowledge.
Fundamental knowledge. You for it or against it?
Well, I'm a scientist, so I'm for it. I'm in an academic institution that's a little bit unusual. It's a nonprofit research institution that has biotech companies in the same building, in the same campus, and so the idea of interchange between that. But and the dichotomy of applied versus basic knowledge research is a silly one to even argue about. If you're going to have a biomarker that allows you to detect whether somebody has early onset of ovarian cancer, let's say, you have to discover what the biology is to make what the biomarker should be. So you've got to do basic research in order to do that. And if the public doesn't pay for this, it's not going to happen. The industry should not, cannot, and will not, and should not probably be funding only that. They take the discoveries made in this combination of academic and nonprofit and other kinds of institutions and turn them into products. We're trying to be a hybrid between those so that we help do it
This
faster.
has always been two kingdoms, right? You know, basic research and then applying it in industry.
In a lot of people's minds, yes. I think the problem is, and a lot of times you hear this in the public, but with our legislators, that I want to see an outcome from this immediately. And 90% of some huge portion of the discoveries that have been made are ones where people are exploring, trying to learn something. They happen to be deeply interested in a problem. Many of these seem like they're just esoteric. The whole recombinant DNA revolution and a whole industry was born out of two guys, and others as well, but Stan Koerner and Boyer playing around in their laboratories. I don't actually call it playing. They were working really hard on something that didn't seem that interesting at the time that turned out to be phenomenal. The Human Genome Project is another great example. There are many, many examples, not just in genetics and genomics and molecular biology, but in all fields of science.
But you're talking about basic research that was publicly funded.
Absolutely.
To begin with, right?
Yes.
And do you see the landscape now as being at all favorable to that kind of funding?
Well, I'm an optimist always, and it's certainly I've been doing this for a long time, and I've seen it decline, but it's not zero. We spend a lot of money. I think this organization plays a really important role in doing that. I think our big problem is that we don't educate the public and our politicians very well. Most academic scientists are barely willing to, or even able, frankly, to talk in the public about what it is they do in everyday language so that you explain why it's so important. When I spend a lot of time talking to the public in our areas and actually elsewhere, and when you take the time to engage them, they're really interested in it, even if it's a very basic problem.
I wonder if that's the problem, though, and everyone can chime in on this, even though I'm eager to hear from Dr. Fauci and our other panelists. But is it that scientists are not able to do it, or that they're trained to do something else? And they're not trained to communicate with the public and make things accessible on a very public scale, or to have sharp elbows to get grants?
So it's all of those. I mean, it's some of each of those. Most scientists haven't been trained to do this. Many learn to, or some learn to do it. Everybody's busy. I mean, it's more and more competitive. The competition makes it work well, I think. The sharp elbows means sometimes, often that means you reward sometimes the best scientists in science, sometimes the most aggressive ones, but it does, it's a good system. I think all of us fear, we've talked about this before lunch, that, and I have feared this for a decade at least, we're scaring off young folks. This does not look as promising as it was when I was thinking about graduate school, although it does seem to come up and down. So.
Back to Dr. Fauci. We're going to pick up on that point, Dr. Fauci.
What's your question?
The question is, you're good at advocating for yourself and advocating for both basic research, and you oversee an enormous operation that has a lot of practical applicability as well. Have you seen the landscape shift away from money for basic research?
Well, yeah, by necessity of the constrained resources, it's almost formulaic that what we do is that we designate a certain amount of work for fundamental, basic, undifferentiated research that is officially known as an R01 pool, where you get investigator-initiated. And then you have what's called programmatic initiatives of things that you need to do. You need to develop an HIV vaccine. You need to find out a point-of-care diagnostic for Ebola. You need to do those other types of things. When you have even a modest increase in a budget, you can actually preserve the fundamental basic research pool at the same time as you do some necessary programmatic initiatives. The problem we found ourselves in right now is that the budget has been flat for 10 years and then superimposed what we all know was a sequestration. And we all know the numbers, we've heard it here many times, that at the end of 10 years, when you have a 2+% inflationary index, that you lose 22% of your purchasing power in 10 years. So when you do that, we do get asked all the time, now what have you done with the money that we've given you? And it's very difficult to explain, as elegant as you can be to someone that it's fundamental basic research is what we've got to do. People want to hear what you can do. I think what we need to do as a nation is to have everybody's got their own solution to it, which means that there's no solution, is to, as a nation, make a commitment that fundamental research and science should not be part of a discretionary pool. I mean, when we look at what happens to us, you have the mandated budget, you have the entitlements, and then you have the discretionary pool. And we're in the discretionary pool. So whenever there needs to be cutting of any budget, it gets cut at the discretionary pool. I think we have to have a complete transformation of how we look at science. And I've tried to articulate that at various levels, and some people get it and some people don't. But at the end of the day, the question always is, what have you done for us? And it's very, very difficult to articulate what we've been articulating about basic research is the fount and the source of what it is we've done for you. So whenever I get asked that question, I never unlink the two. Because if we keep talking about what have you done for me lately, 5 years from now, if you shrink this discovery pool, we're not going to be able to tell anybody what we've done for them lately, or we're going to tell you we've been doing the same thing that we've been doing for the last 5 years. So it's a very difficult problem, and I think we need a complete transformational change about how we look at science in this country. And it has to come from above. I mean, it has to come from administrations, it has to come from elected officials, The trouble, as we all know, I'm telling the choir how to sing here, is that when you have a cycle of people who are elected anywhere from 2 to 4 to 6 years, they're looking at 2 to 4 to 6 years. And research, you know, the molecular biological revolution didn't happen in a 2 to 4 to 6 year cycle. It happened over a long period of time for people who were committed to it.
So two unfortunately big follow-up questions. One, a little bit of shading in of the transformational change you'd like. And second, bonus question, would that look like anything before? Was there a golden age in which politicians had the long view and just thought, let's fund things for the next, for 3 generations away, we'll never know, because we're philanthropists.
Well, they did it, but they didn't know they were doing it.
That's exactly right.
So they did it. They gave a certain amount of money that allowed the scientists to do that delicate balance between fundamental research that is research, maybe you don't know where it's going to go, and yet to be able to do things like develop a polio vaccine or develop this or develop that. And there was always that balance where you could actually do both. The lesion, Corby, is that when you're so restricted, you can't do both. And the thing that cries out to be done is, what are you doing for me lately? And that's the reason why you see the other pool shrinking, why you have success rates now that are preposterous. My success rate years ago was 35, 36%. Now it's 12%, 14%, 15%. I mean, that's untenable.
I'm going to come back about the transformational change, but Dr. Seffrin has been very patient.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. Mary wants straight talk. I think, first of all, we need to put and stipulate right up front, we need to integrate and balance our research portfolio. And it needs to be more for basic, and it needs to be more for applied, more for prevention research, more for public health research. It probably wasn't called the NIH, National Institutes of Health, because it could have been the National Institutes of Biomedical Research. But I think the implication was the American public wants to invest in something to get better health. And so we should be tough on ourselves in the following way. I think that the work of Research America is historic. I mean, we did double the NIH budget in a 5-year period of time, the only time that's ever happened in 100 years. So I think we know we can increase the priority for research. But we have to sort of say, have we really made the value proposition as strongly as we can? And I think the answer is no. So 1,600 people die today of cancer. Different from when I got involved 4 decades ago, most of them are suffering and dying needlessly. They don't have to die of cancer. We now have cures for cancer, not as many as we'd like, but we have actual targeted therapies that work for a subset of patients. So I think we have to make the value proposition. And the value proposition for investing a hell of a lot more in research is better than just about any other value proposition out there, including national security. The president's speech last night, you think about national security. When the nation has been faced with a health, safety, and a security issue of compelling interest, and we had the evidence to back it up, we tend to respond. We have that evidence. If we do the right thing, we can guarantee results. And you're right, Tony, about the short-term thing, but we need to take the longer view. Not every legislator is the Honorable John Porter and Michael and others. We have to then make that case. Then we have to make noise and get the word out there. I mean, when you think, I complimented Tony because he's done such a great job on the media of balancing, getting, as an expert, but also as a communicator, not creating a frenzy of hysteria over Ebola, but also pointing out this is a serious issue we need to address. And I think we will. I think he is. What about the tsunami of non-communicable diseases that's coming down the road in this country and worldwide? We have interventions that work, that have been proven to work. We have to fund them. If we don't, shame on us. So it's a clear and present danger if we don't beef up our investment in research.
So be even straighter in your talk, because that's a value proposition everybody in this room agrees with. I mean, I don't think you have to make the case to all of us for that value proposition. Why does it remain that it needs to be made? Why is it so hard to make? What's getting in the way of transmitting that message to people not like us?
I think there are 2 things. I think, again, when you think of Michael Castle, not every legislator is like that. I think you have to go to them and draw a picture And then you also have to say the following, which we now can say with the World Economic Forum report and Harvard University. Oh, by the way, if you don't respond to this, here's what you're going to pay for it. The reduction in economic productivity. So now you've linked health, safety, and security with economic productivity. It's a compelling case. And then we need to be able to say, which we're awfully sweet usually, we need to say, and oh, by the way, we intend to hold you accountable. Next week, literally a week from today, we'll have 600 cancer survivors and advocates from virtually 435 congressional districts in Washington. And we're giving them specific messages. And those messages are, we want something done. We want more for biomedical research, for cancer research, and so on. And I just think we have to play harder ball.
Play harder ball. Okay, well, listen up, everybody. That's one of the
And there
messages.
needs to be new ball players, too.
How do you mean?
And, well, I've been visiting with Congress a lot, and this past week I've had 6 visits, and they all tell me the same thing, that it can't be just scientists and engineers, but heads of agencies in there asking for more money for their agencies, but that some of the people that we affect should be in there talking with them. There should be more industry people, for example, they would like to see. And I know that every industry person I speak with has it on their list of priorities, but it's not like 1, 2, or 3. It's like 9 or 10, and you only have 10 or 15 minutes or something, and you don't get to number 9. And so while they're all for it, and they all use it, they don't really internalize the crisis that we're facing and make it a number 1 or 2 priority. So they say it would make a big difference if industry people from a small, medium size, and large that were in their districts, or at least in their states, were in there making the case. And the other people they'd really like to hear from, and this is something I'll bring the message back to associations of university presidents, is that how about bringing some students along when a faculty member or a university president goes and visits Congress, because the student stories are very compelling about their sense of excitement and of discovery, where they're going next and how they get funded is something that would really resonate. So they need to hear from other ball players.
How do you explain, and we're going to pick on Dr. Hait here, how do you explain industry's reluctance to give time to this kind of advocacy if indeed they plan to continue relying on the kind of discoveries of basic research? Why aren't they looking at this golden goose or this necessary partner and saying we should be spending our time advocating?
Yeah,
They just assume everybody's going to do a fine job.
So it's all relative. I don't think that it's not a high priority. In fact, it is. So a company like J&J, and I'm guessing many of the large companies, we have big public policy groups in Washington pounding away all the time. But I do think there is an angle that we could do better on. I think that when faculty members go and advocate, it's quite self-serving. It's quite self-serving. When industry goes and advocates for universities, that's not as self-serving. And I think that's enlightened self-interest. And I think that's something we can take advantage of. The other point that Tony was making about the golden era, if that was the case, there were also leaders like John Porter, like Ted Kennedy, like Lowell Weicker, who felt that investment in research was important. They didn't get down into the weeds of how you invested. They just were advocates, and they were bipartisan. They'd go across the aisle. Maybe you guys see it today, but I don't see much of that happening today.
Does anyone on this panel see that? Or an advocate in Congress for basic research?
See, lots of them.
Sure,
I mean, I in fact haven't met anybody, and I've done dozens and dozens of visits since I started in April on both sides of the aisle, and to a person, they get very engaged and enthusiastic, and often they'll have a picture of something, to do with space or discovery in their office, and we'll talk about that. They're under a lot of constraints fiscally.
But do they come together across the aisle to make it happen? That's the
No,
issue.
that's a real challenge. And in fact, to the extent if we allow in this room science to become political, and we must really fight that very carefully and strategically with our arguments, that it's always been nonpartisan, that was created, actually many of our agencies were created out of national needs, and we shouldn't forget that, but point out how fundamental research addresses over some period of time these national needs.
Doc,
Yeah.
Dr. Fauci, I think you were
Well,
going to add something, and does that cut any ice?
No, I don't think so. Not that I don't think what you're saying cuts any ice. Is I'm all for advocacy, but you know, having gone to virtually every congressional office trying to explain about the importance of biomedical research, you're absolutely right, France, that every single person says they're in favor of it. But I don't think that if you're in favor of it and it's self-evident that if 2 other people come in, you're going to do something different. I am very sorry, but that's not going to happen. They're telling you we can't do it because right now this is not the highest priority. The highest priority is budgetary constraints and getting the budget under control. That's the reality. So although I'm all for advocacy, I think that, well, if I go in and say something that I think is self-evident, well, they may not do it. And then if you and you go in and say the same thing, well, maybe they're going to want to do it. And then if that table goes in and says it, now we're going to do it. They're not going to do it. And they're not going to do it because of the budgetary constraints. And I think that's why I say you need to transform in the big picture where we as a nation put biomedical research, because it's not the priority. And I think no matter how many people come in there, it's not a priority right now when the most important thing to do is to balance the budget.
But don't you think that when we have Ebola on our shores or SARS or...
That was my question.
Yeah.
Why don't you ask it?
I'm sorry. But I mean, the problem is we wait until it's a crisis.
Right.
And I mean, how many of these have been averted because we do have basic knowledge and
Wait a
the ability to do
minute,
it?
are you saying that I don't think we should have? I definitely think we do, but I think that they're not going to spontaneously give us resources for it.
Sure.
That's the point.
But
No,
why?
I
If
agree
this
with that.
can't shock them into seeing the need for basic research, what will?
Oh my goodness. I think the opposite, Corby. This will shock them into thinking, where was that vaccine that you should have gotten for me? The first I'm sorry, I could tell you a scene that's not going to happen. Somebody's going to call me up and say, Tony, did you see there's an exponential rise in Ebola in West Africa? Why didn't we do basic research? That's not going to happen. It's, why didn't we have a vaccine? I see Julie shaking her head because she's been through that with me a few times when she was at the CDC. But anyway, that's another story.
Let's move on to a cheerier. let's move on to a cheerier topic, which is the preparation of students and getting them to think that basic research is going to be, beautifully funded and an easy road for them to go down. So we had Dr. Hait. Why don't you start, Dr. Warren?
So the U.S. was and has been and probably will stay, I think, the leader in innovation and advances that have had major impact in biomedical and other sciences. And the reason is that we have had a culture that gets young people into science when their brains are still working really well, as opposed to when you get a lot older.
So flattering to the audience.
I'm referring to myself, and gives them resources and a culture that is very competitive, and that's why we've done so well. And I've been training graduate students, postdocs, undergraduates for a long time now, and young people are still very excited about wanting to do something positive for the world, and they see this, and especially the really smart ones see this as a great, exciting thing to be able to do and feel that there's not opportunity. So I think we've all seen a real decline. It doesn't mean that we're losing them entirely. You still get great students and young folks coming in, but they don't see a career. One thing that has changed, when I was in graduate school, at least in the culture that I was in, you were supposed to then go do a postdoc and then supposed to then go to be a faculty member. That model has changed, and I think it's good that we change our models. I don't think they should always be stagnant, and I'm interested in hearing what Tony is saying, how fundamentally we need to change some of this. But the reason it's changed is there are many other opportunities. I'm glad we have people who have Ph.D.s in the biomedical sciences doing policy things, doing things at NIH, at NSF. Imagine them being not very smart and trying to do those things. It would be terrible. So we need to have we have those other kinds of opportunities. Biotech industry created lots of jobs. There are many, many other things. I think what we should be training is people to learn how to think like scientists and be able to use that in a variety of areas.
As opposed to like investment bankers. So, Dr. Hait, where are the incentives for students now?
You know, it's a striking change, at least what I've seen. So there was a time when the best and the brightest students would just love to go to a great medical school where they were exposed not just to the state-of-the-art of care, but also to the physicians who are also involved in science. And that culture that's what spawned a Tony Fauci or other people in this room, you don't see that as much today. That's being depleted. And that was also a magnet for kids, young people to come from around the world to train at these great academic institutions, not only to get to the state-of-the-art of medicine and bring that back to their country or stay, but also because of their curiosity, and they had role models to go into their labs, learn how to do research, and then take on a career in biomedical research. That was a phenomenal training ground for some of the best and the brightest, and that's being depleted, I'm afraid.
So what's the way around it? Who is going to step in and make that up? And I'm going to bring it back to China. Is that kind of system being instituted, as well as the enormous amount of funding, which I would assume is much more pragmatically oriented?
We certainly don't see it in China yet, but have no fear. There's 1.2 billion people, a huge number of extraordinarily smart people. Freedom is breaking out all over. It'll be freedom of thought. They'll get it, and they're traveling within the world is flat. It's going to happen. We need to restore that culture because it was just such an it is an incredibly exciting time to see a patient, see a problem that's not solved, and then being able to go into a laboratory and begin working on a project that you may take years to work on. It's thrilling, and I'd like to see that. I hope we can restore that culture. I'm not sure how, though.
Dr. Myers, do you have any great ideas how to restore it?
Well, I think part of maybe changing our model a little bit might be where you just don't have a standard pathway and there's one and only one way to do it. I think team science in academia has increased a lot. It's partly the programmatic ones where you have a need, but it's also collaborations between labs where you don't require each individual assistant professor to become completely independent. At the same time, we don't want to do away with that because that's where a lot of the innovation comes. So we need to get a balance. And I think you mentioned something earlier that we do have a lot of partnerships in my field with industry. I mean, it is a lot back and forth with pharma, with the ag, because we need to feed the world. We need to have another agricultural revolution. We do have those partnerships, but they're not as frequent and not as open as they could and should be. And I don't think that necessarily means industry is not going to foot the bill for the basics, for the large amounts that need to be done here. But at the same time, I think having partnerships where we see those problems together more, I think will lead to helping the problem that we're having now.
Go ahead.
This doesn't just start at the university or in graduate school. We need a wholesale different approach with the very youngest people. NSF works across the spectrum from, we call it K to gray, and in trying to improve
K to gray.
K to gray, to improve our outreach for science. And we're more and more intrigued by the possibility of the change in conversation, making science more local and doing more community building. We have teachers who are very enthusiastic about science, who don't have often partners in order to learn more and what kind of tools they can bring into the classroom. And I think all of you know, you're from different states, that K through 12 is home rule, and it's very, very different, and they're under much, much different constraints than we're at the university. But in partnerships in our, with community organizations, mayors, even governors, K through 12 schools, and their teachers with universities, if they're really active partnerships, we can reach out and those kids can become aware. I mean, I didn't know how to spell science as a kid. I actually majored in English as an undergraduate student, and now I'm head of the National Science Foundation. That happens because of a moment or an opportunity for inspiration, and we just don't have enough of them. So we need to start building in infrastructure, and I think what the direction NSF is going is to try to build regional infrastructures, because every community, whether it's a big city, an inner city, or it's out in the suburbs, or it's in the country in some rural area, has different opportunities for science and to engage students in real science experiments and touching it. And you just don't know where that's going to lead. If you're not going to have some young girl who's never been exposed to a scientist become the director of one of our agencies.
Dr. Fauci, this idea of inspiration, which could lead to lots of basic research and being able to pursue these fruitful new blue sky fields. What's that transformation you had in mind? How would it look?
Well, the transformation I'm talking about is a fundamental commitment as a nation, and I keep coming back, it has to come from the highest levels. It has to come from an administration, and it has to come from the leaders in Congress, that we're not going to diddle around with these little talkings, but we're going to actually change the system. We're going to make a commitment, a long-term 50-year commitment, not a commitment for a budget cycle of 1 year, that we as a nation feel that science in general, but for what we're talking about today, the health sciences, is something that we absolutely need to support. You know, it's very interesting. It's a shame, because when you were talking about the Chinese, and you were saying quite correctly that sooner or later they're going to get it, because they are known to probably, I would say a little bit unfairly, they can do a lot of things when somebody else discovers it, but they're not the ones to discover it. But we do have in this nation, for reasons that are historical about how we were formed, it's a nation of immigrants, it's a nation of people who are always in upward mobility in the sense of trying to do better, a very, very creative mindset that you don't see almost in any other place as much as it is here. And it would be such a shame when you take those people who have the capability of being incredibly iconoclastically creative to go into something other than science, or other than the biomedical aspects of science. So that's the thing that worries me most. If you stay on this track a bit longer and don't make that transformational change of saying that we as a nation are going to support this, that we're going to get people who are just no longer interested in it anymore. And that's really going to be a shame, because it's going to take generations to get that back. So what I mean by transformation is a real commitment that goes decades commitment, not 2-year commitment.
You mean space launch, kind of?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about, Corby. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe, or perhaps an even more inspirational vision than we currently have, I think, could be a rallying cry. Can we envision a time? So you take some of the most serious diseases and you say, by 2030, can you envision a time when there is no more type 2 diabetes? And if you can envision that, what do you have to do today to make that a reality? That inspires young people, especially if they've had diabetes in their family, cancer in their family. That inspires them to get involved. And I think the idea that we can predict who will get diseases will become clearer and clearer. and the idea that we can preempt, we can prevent, we can intercept the process. That's a compelling vision that I think kids can rally around, young people can rally around, and God knows even Congress might rally around it, but that's not for me to say.
Do you want to add anything?
I was just going to add to this that how do we do what Tony just suggested? How do we get the nation? We have to inspire them. We have to teach them. We have to spend our time doing it. I do spend time with some of our elected officials talking about how the impact that this is having on our economy. At least 60 or 70% of our economy comes from science, math, and engineering, not from I mean, we want everything to be there, but that is a major, major impact. I don't know what the numbers are for NSF and NIH, but every dollar spent has got to be at least $10 or some significant number. In some fields, even more. Battelle did a study on genomics, which was admittedly a new field that's just starting to see, and at least a couple of years ago, the multiplier was 141-fold for the Human Genome Project. We won't see that in everything, and I don't want that to be the only argument we make to the public. They
But if
also
it's
have to be
compelling.
inspired. But it is a compelling one, and it is the way that the U.S. will stay competitive.
Well, this has been an inspirational panel. We face threat. We face a great environment for discovery that you're all here to forward and to promote with the kind of passion we've seen on this panel. So I wish you all luck having your message received. And thank you all
Thank
for...
you, Corby. Thank you.
I so wanted to, but I was given constant and dire wrap up now. Yes, I'm afraid I can't. I was told to wrap up, so that's why I wrapped up. I obey orders.
She said 5.
Oh, okay. We've been given a special reprieve. Mary Woolley has arranged it. Let's have some hands, and let's try to ask 2 or 3 questions at a time, and have lightning rounds. Hand up, hand up. Let's ask both these questions at the same time. Go ahead.
I appreciate so much the comment. We appreciated the comment about a transformative change, the notion of shifting the budget, literally. Can you comment on what you think it'll take to accomplish that? Meaning to move from discretionary to mandatory money.
Right, okay, pragmatic, how to do it. I'll repeat your question if we can't get the mic.
I can talk loudly. I work for Commerce. You talked a lot about being under-coordinated and involved in research and science and looking for new avenues of revenue or funding, of course. And we all know about the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, which was on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and it really got the public's interest.
The question.
Okay. Well, the question is, knowing about that, I'd like you to comment on how to expand this, increase public awareness and support for public and private funding, because we can two things. One, increase funding, it raised over $100 million, and 2, spark that interest in those young people that might not
Ice
otherwise
bucket on
have.
every congressman's head.
Okay.
So I have an answer to the second one, an ice bucket on every congressman's head.
Okay, the first, how to make that transformational moment practical. Anyone want to address that?
Well, somebody's just got to do it. In 2002, when we were looking at the devastation of sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean with HIV, when President Bush, he sent me to Africa and he says, go down and see if there's any way that we can make an impact that would actually, and that was the word that was used, transform HIV in the developing world for a world that's suffering disproportionately because of the extraordinary number of deaths and infections. So I did. I went down there. I spent a few weeks, came back, and put together a program which ultimately became PEPFAR. And I told him, I said, that's going to take billions of dollars, like $15 billion over 5 years, which was a start. Ultimately, it's much, much, much more than that. OMB went completely nuts. They thought I was crazy, and I kind of went into a witness protection program from them. But the decision was made by the president and by the Congress at the time that this was worth it, and they did it. And there was a transformation of HIV in the world where actually the curve is starting to go down. Now, if we had been at the edges of that, we still would have been chasing it. But that's one transformation. I don't know whether it's going to be the same model But that's actually what happened. There was a decision made at multiple levels that this was something we absolutely had to do, and it was done.
We're often reactive rather than proactive, and I think that's part of the problem. You were referring to doing things earlier. You catch diseases early, you're going to be able to treat them a lot better, even prevent them. But if we only wait, and that's, I mean, obviously we need to deal with crises when they arise.
But being proactive requires much more boldness
Sure.
than being reactive. Did we have questions on this side of the room? Gentlemen.
Well, you said boldness, so let me just say that there's a great panel. A lot of good things were said. One of the things I'd like to underscore is that there's been people in leadership positions, namely Senator Specter, Congressman Porter, Mary Lasker, who went against the grain. It's always a big deal. The budget problem's always bad. It's terrible now. But they led, and that leading voice was responded to. We've got to find who, whether in the Congress or the administration, is willing to have the courage or boldness to say, this is very important despite what the context is, and therefore show leadership. The question is how we help them do that.
It's up to everyone in this room to help them do that. Were there other questions? I think we've reached our 5-minute period of grace.
Maybe a comment rather than a question.
Oh, no, we want questions.
Turn into a question. In the beginning of the conversation about advocacy, we talked about great scientists going and making long comments, etc. I'm fortunate enough to be an elected official at the state level and in Congress, and without a doubt, the people who made the greatest impression on me in lobbying were those who had a disease or a problem, had been patients or whatever it may be. It may be self-interested to a degree, but they would come in and they would lay out what their problems were. Sometimes they didn't understand all the funding connections and mechanisms, but in my judgment, when we talk about advocacy, we should not leave out the patient.
Imagine how popular Dr. Fauci would be bringing in a group of Ebola sufferers. So I think that would...
But how about their family members who watch them die? Yeah.
That could get a lot of attention. So we've had many strategies. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you, Corby.